Start with an acknowledgement of country. On behalf of those present, I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we now meet. I pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. I also pay my respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people of Australia and hope the path towards reconciliation continues to be shared and embraced. Today we're here with 3 of our National Teaching Award recipients, but before we go into introducing our National Award recipients, I'd like to introduce you to the awards team that does a lot of work behind the scenes. Angeline Sims, so she's been instrumental in organising the awards, and Dr. Jin Yi, who's been the awards team coordinator, and myself as the director of the awards for the past 3.5 years. And as you've all heard, the government's announcement that this will be the final year that they'll be sponsoring the awards. So we will run the awards for this year, and then the DVCs are forming a group and looking for external sponsorship. So there may be some hope that the awards continue on beyond 2021. Today we have some fantastic guest speakers, and they're going to be focusing on tips to help potential applicants apply for an award. I'd like to introduce the 3 groups of speakers. So the first one is Associate Professor Jack Wang. Jack Wang is from University of Queensland, and he was awarded the Teaching Excellence Award in 2020 for Citizen Scientist for the Digital Age. Welcome, Jack. Good to have you here.
Morning, Angela. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Jack. And then the next group, we have Professor Blake McKimmie, Professor Barbara Mesa and Professor Mark Horswill. They are the Psychology of Criminal Justice team, also from University of Queensland. They received the Teaching Excellence Award in 2019 for transforming student learning by a novel dramatic narrative. So welcome, Blake, Barbara and Mark.
Hi there, everyone.
And finally, we have Associate Professor Kevin Larkin. He's from Griffith University, and he was awarded the Teaching Excellence Award in 2018 for transforming how maths education is taught. So welcome, Kevin.
Thanks, Angela. Nice to be here.
Great. All right. Today is a session that we're going to use to help prepare participants for applying for the 2021 award. And I'd like to start with the first question, and that is, why did you apply for the award? And I might start with Blake, Barbara and Mark. So maybe we start with you, then I'll move to Jack and then Kevin. So Blake and his team, why did this team apply for an award?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. So I think we'd got to the point where we'd been quite lucky to sort of be recognised at our institution with an award, and then also we'd won the edX prize for the MOOC version of the course and some other international prizes. And it was kind of, we thought, just the missing piece of recognition, really, and we thought it would be, it was a good opportunity to sort of think a bit more about what we'd done and put together an application for recognition at the national level, because the award scheme's a little bit different to the other ones we've been part of. And so it was really just a different sort of challenge for us to think about what we'd been doing, what evidence there was that it was really effective.
I think that there's that thought with generally as academics that there's all these very well established systems for rewarding, for example, research excellence and all that sort of thing. But teaching is very much considered as just something you do to earn your salary. And yet when you have to put in, of course, significant learning, teaching innovations, it takes an awful lot of time and effort. And I think awards like this are just one way where you can actually get the equivalent of, for example, a paper in Nature. Yeah.
But just to add into this, I think it's really important in our teaching practice that we continue to critically reflect on what we're doing, and writing an award application forces you to critically reflect on whether you're actually doing anything that's any good. So keeping that ongoing engagement with the material and really thinking through practice.
Fantastic, great set of responses. All right, we'll move to Jack. Jack, what made you to apply for an award last year? And I heard you had a mentor too, Jack.
No, that's right. Well, I think the key here is that it's a big part of our institutional culture. So Blake, Barbara, and Mark and myself, we're from UQ, and all of my immediate colleagues have won national teaching awards. So it was kind of like, well, who's kind of going to be next? And I think that is such a crucial part of it that I don't think any of us would be here without some level of support. And within UQ, within my school, in science and the Faculty of Science, it was just like, hey, let's support who we can. And I think that's one of the reasons I kind of went into it initially, because there's support there and it's very much recognised and recommended to go forward.
Fantastic. And Kevin, did you have the support that Jack was talking about?
Yeah, similarly at Griffith, we have a strong teaching and learning culture. Similar to what Blake and the team were saying, I'd already been recognised at Griffith, so the university encouraged me to apply. I think that the most important thing is that learning and teaching is recognised nationally. So we only get that if people are applying for the awards. And in my case, it's good to give mathematics a bit of a positive plug as well.
Fantastic. Common theme is that you all see that learning and teaching is important to be valued at the national level. It's a good way to reflect on what you're doing as well and keep currency in your learning and teaching. I guess benchmark it across other academics across all the institutions nationally and in Blake's team's case, Blake, Mark and Barbara, in international space as well. You've got a few international awards on learning and teaching. So thank you for those responses around why you applied. The next thing I want to ask is, what are the benefits of winning the award? And I'll start with you, Kevin, because you received the award in 2018, so you've been award recipient for the last couple of years. The longest standing award recipients. What benefits have the award brought for you?
I was going to say dedicated university parking, but I won't mention that. It's kind of in a way, it's the reverse of why we apply. So in my case, again, there was a lot of really nice publicity around maths education, and that maths education can be done in a positive way that encourages people to embrace mathematics. So the flip side of why I applied, I guess. I think also in my case, when I won the award, I was a senior lecturer, so I think it sent a message that the committee recognised that good quality teaching can happen at I'll just use the word lower for convenience, a sort of a lower level of the university. So I thought that was a nice benefit. And for me, I guess it's given me a level of access to have some influence in the university without to have a formal leadership position in the university. So I'm in the nice space of grandfather space, I suppose, to be able to give advice, but without having the responsibility to carry it through. So yeah, I guess those have been a couple of benefits. Of course, for applications, promotions and things, it's very important as well.
Can I ask, Kevin, did you apply for promotion straight after you got the award?
It was happening around the same time. I was eventually promoted, not eventually, but I was promoted, but it was on a balanced one. It certainly fed into the mix, yeah.
Yeah, and I didn't realise that you were a senior lecturer at the time you got the award. Great addition to your CV in order to get that associate professor. If we now go to the team, Blake, Barbara and Mark, so you've been an award holder for, more than a year? What are the benefits that you found?
I'd like to say that we got invited to travel to lots of exotic locations and give high-profile talks, but no. We have had sort of invitations to do, speak to lots of people around the world, virtually, is one of the, it's always good fun doing that and sort of hearing what the challenges are in other places. They're surprisingly common. I think everyone's facing a lot of the same challenges. A bit more, I think what Kevin was saying too, it gives you a bit more of a platform at the university to have a say and opens up opportunities for roles. And you can you've got to remember to, pick and choose carefully. Otherwise you can be inundated with sort of commitment because, there are a lot of opportunities to influence the direction of teaching and learning on campus once you get an award like this. I don't know, Barbara and Mark.
So, well, for example, I can give an example of exactly what Blake's talking about there, where, sort of just the other week we were in a room with our Pro Vice Chancellor and our Vice Chancellor, and they all knew who we were and they literally asked us for solutions to the teaching problems facing universities. And so I think there's so you do get recognition at senior level and there are advantages to that. So, like Blake's done an awful lot of stuff in this thing, but for myself, for example, this last semester I was invited to go on this working party at university, which is all about revising our assessment policy. Part of that was because of sort of award. Yeah, so literally the person running the committee said, "Oh yeah, I know you because your photo was on the face of this handout that got sent around because of the award." So yes.
But just, I mean, linking into something that Jack said, again, it establishes, that the norm of how seriously we take teaching and learning at UQ. We were fortunate that we were not going for promotion at that time, but I think it signals very clearly that this is something, teaching excellence is something that every academic strives for or wants to achieve at UQ.
That's so lovely to hear that you're setting up a model of behaviour. Like you don't realise it, but actually trying to influence the culture so that everyone's striving for that excellence in learning and teaching. And yes, you have been plastered quite a lot. You would have seen a few of my LinkedIn posts where I would have you plastered all over my posts. So I'm a big fan of past teaching award winners, having been a recipient, the first female to get their Teaching Excellence Award many, many years ago. And I was only level A at the time, Kevin. So they really gave them back to the really junior academics back then. So, Jack, over to you. What have the benefits been for you? You're the most recent recipient.
Well, actually, my ears have been wide open listening to the past recipients. Make sure that I get all the same perks that you've all received. But it's only been a few months. I guess all of the above, and hopefully being able to shape the direction of our discussions at university about teaching and learning. But my work revolves around citizen science and getting as many people involved. And I think that's the biggest part. It's benefited my own science educational research, and I had a project that was recently funded by the Australian Council of Deans of Science, where we want to get a lot of scientists on board to make lab skills videos. And I think I can't be sure that the award is linked to getting this grant and getting that recognition and forming more collaborations, but I'm going to say it probably didn't hurt in that process. But yeah, as all of you know, it's been a strange few months, and I'm the most recent recipient, so I'm hoping I'll get more benefits as we go.
Oh, fantastic. Excellent. Okay, now we're going to get to the question that we're all here for, and that is tips and how did you go about preparing for your application. So we'll start off with, how did you go about preparing for your application? Did you just sit down one day and write it in one go, submit it, and that was the end of story? Is that how it worked? Because that's not how it worked for me. So I'd love to hear your stories. Jack, we'll start with you this time. Should be fresh in your memory because you're the most recent one.
Yes, but the reality of it is, as we all know, it's not a recent process. It takes a long time, and it began when I applied for our internal teaching award applications 8 years ago. And UQ has set up the criteria to mirror that of the national scheme. So really, I've been collecting evidence for about 8 years, whether I knew it or not. But I think understanding the criteria early on is very important, because I think we'll get to this later. Collecting evidence, you really can't do that in 12 months unless your project is very, very impactful straight away. And I think given that I was looking for internal recognition first, that really paved the way. And I think that if the timing was ever going to happen, it would have been about this time, because it really takes that long. Maybe not 8 years, but at least 2 or 3 years to collect the evidence to gain the momentum. And it comes back to support. And again, with Blake's team at UQ winning very recently, there was kind of some fresh inspiration as to the approaches and the kinds of innovation that would be more eye-catching maybe in this kind of application context.
Fantastic. Yeah, so it does 8 years. That's quite interesting. We'll hear from the others, but I remember when I wrote my award, it was the same thing. I applied for a faculty-based award and then the university level award, and failed at the university level award 3 times. Well, the first time I thought, how do you even put together a 15-page dossier? Because it was the requirements were 15-page dossier. What evidence? And I'd been teaching for 10 years at this stage already. And then sort of really realising, how do you collect? What evidence do you need to collect? Understanding their criteria is very... And back in those days, there was an alignment between a faculty award, a university award, and a national award. So making sure the universities are aligned. And most universities are now using the national awards, the criteria and the assessment matrix as their sort of benchmark. So that all helps. But yeah, interesting. It does take a long time. In my case, it wasn't just a simple, let's write down an application and you're in. We'll go to Blake and Mark and Barbara.
Yeah, so I think we sort of started a little bit like Jack. We started with the university award application, and if I remember correctly, that was 2016. Is that right? Yeah. It was a long process to collect the evidence, and I think we actually had 3 runs at the national award. The first one, we
didn't get through the internal process.
We didn't. Yeah, we were kind of. At one point, we got feedback from an external expert that maybe this year wasn't our year and we need to collect a bit more evidence. And then the second time through, we submitted the application and were not successful. And the third time, we were asked to apply again, and we had some advice that we should just go for a citation this time and then maybe build up to an award. And so we sort of looked at all the advice we'd got and we thought, we're going to go for the award because we've already written it as an award. And so we kind of decided what sort of feedback we're going to take on board and which feedback we thought, maybe we understand where they're coming from, but we think we can address that, with the application, and then we just went for it. So that's kind of the process we went through.
Yeah. So I think that's a great general point, where seek lots of feedback on whatever you're doing as you go through, but be prepared that some of that feedback will be good, some of it will be also terrible feedback, and so take each one on its own merits. And then I think the other thing is stick like glue to the criteria, because I think and this goes for all applications and funding and awards and everything, is often people fail because they are missing the letter of the criteria. Yeah.
And I think the critical thing is that you have to gather the evidence, and it doesn't mean that you immediately go for an award. I think as we teach, we always gather evidence about whether our students are learning, whether they're engaged, all those sorts of things. And you start to look at the criteria, and you have to ask yourself very hard questions about, would I accept this as good evidence? And often we've done various bits and pieces where we're like, no, it wasn't good evidence. No one else is convinced. So you can start the process at a relatively low level. You can take what you're doing to your colleagues and see if they're convinced that you're actually meeting the outcomes that you think that you are, and just sort of get that low level feedback before working up to awards. I think it's absolutely essential part of what we do to always be looking at whether we're achieving the learning outcomes, for example, more broadly, that we want to for our students.
Kevin, how did you go about preparing for the application?
Just did mine the night.
The night before.
It's a very similar story, but add, I guess, 2 years, or not 2 years to what Jack said, but just shuffle things back, much the same thing, sort of going through the process from Griffith from about 2014 on, being unsuccessful every time before getting sort of the success. So I had a few dot points down, but we've covered a lot of that. But I think you need to be prepared for a lot of drafting of the application. They're very, very specific. It's a very, very specific genre. Don't be surprised when you're working with colleagues and external helpers that they ask you to do another draft. It gets to the stage where sort of one word throws you onto the 9th page, so what word you're going to sort of cut out. But so you have to do a lot of drafts. I think you have to be prepared to get out of your comfort zone a little bit in terms of really identifying your strengths and being prepared to communicate them. It is a competitive process. As Jack said, be collecting your data, but go beyond the usual suspects as well. Everyone who's applying for these awards will have excellent set and sec results. They'll have really good student feedback. So you're looking for evidence that's sort of a bit beyond that. So that could be from peers at your university in another discipline, could be from colleagues at different universities, could be institutional level data. What's the university's quilt scores and what have you had to do with them, student employability, etc. I guess look for those measures beyond just your own course. And then esteem measures as well. And I guess we'll get onto this a little bit later, but make sure you're immersed in the scholarly literature at a university level overall, but then particularly Jack's case, the science literature, Blake and team's case, the psychology literature, my case, educational literature, and make sure that comes across really clearly in your application, that the decisions you're making, theoretically, pedagogically rich, as was mentioned before. Make sure you read the criteria and the elaborations. I'm sure there have been really good applications that have just missed out because they haven't met a criteria somewhere along the line. Yeah, make sure you have those criteria with you and you're addressing them as you go. I think, as Jack mentioned, read prior application from your own university, from other universities, so you're familiar with the genre, and then you can make informed decisions about whether this is what you want to do with a big part of your life for a couple of years.
Summarise about how did you go preparing for the application. One of the things that stood out to me is that, we didn't write it the night before, even though we would have liked to, and just submitted it. And it took us, in fact, several years to actually put the submission through. And last week we had Shelley Kanash present. And she talked about preparing for a submission, and she used the analogy of Lego Masters. And in Lego Masters, in order for you to get to the grand final, you have to do 16 builds. So you have to build an artifact, and you have to go through, round 1, round 2, round 3, and there's 16 different builds. And each time you do a build, you have constructive criticism, you get your peers to review it, things fall apart, you have to rethink how you would do this, what's the story you're trying to tell. She did this beautiful analogy, but the thing that came across is that even when your build failed, you never give up. You then have another go, you take on board the feedback, and so that's all part of the preparation. Now, some of you already started touching on the next question, which is around, some of the tips. So if I ask you guys to give me 5 tips, just given you raised some really good points, and then we'll just go around, and if there's any additional points that haven't been raised, maybe the others can start. We might start with Jack. We might start with you again. For what are your sort of 5 tips for writing an award-winning application?
All right, Angela, I'm trying to get to 5, right? So
Okay.
I'm trying to get to 5 separate tips. So I guess the first thing is the types of evidence. And I guess what Kevin alluded to is out of the box. So what evidence did I include that was a bit out of the box? So I included reviewers' comments for papers I published around the work that I was doing. I mean, if they're favorable, there's a lot of negative reviewers' comments, but usually the ones that if paper's accepted, there's usually something good from the editor or the reviewer. So that's another piece of evidence. Student quotes are great, but I think what I did was I have before and after quotes to show the progression of students. So it's not just all the good stuff. I showed some bad student quotes and then led into the good stuff to show that, my interventions actually developed the student thinking. The other tip I have is, for me, the evidence, of course, was hard to collect. But in the last 3 years, because I've been applying for a while, the last 3 years, the evidence didn't change that much. It was kind of there. But what really I had to focus on was telling the story. And that's the hardest part for me as a scientist, because we're not trained to write in this medium at all. And we're just very much taught the data is the only thing that matters. What you think and feel are ultimately irrelevant. But if you don't have that piece within this genre of writing, it just doesn't sell it, right? It just doesn't connect. And that was the biggest thing that I had to grapple with. And connecting all the evidence through the lens of a story I was telling was the most important thing I had to focus on myself. Okay, so that's 3. I'm trying to get to 5. So the other bit of advice is that when you're putting together your supporting materials, which I think the formatting has not changed too much, that seems like a bit of an afterthought when you're writing the application, first of all. But it's so important, because if you can connect to the supporting materials very consistently, and your supporting materials is maybe more graphical than text heavy, as an example, although I think mine still had too much text, that would really help the reviewers succinctly see artifacts of your learning and your teaching and learning. And then my last tip is that if you can connect to national or international recognition outside of your institution, I think that is the quickest way, a shortcut of evidencing your impact. All of us at this stage would have a lot of institutional recognition to be nominated to apply. I think that outside the institution, that is what you need to grab onto. Conferences, presentations, working within professional societies in your discipline. That is, I think, what gave my application an edge. That's my 5.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you, Jack, so much. Kevin, we'll go to you next, and then we'll go to the psychology team after you.
Thanks. So, endorsing everything Jack said there. For me, to have an overarching narrative structure, there should be something that ties all of the application together, that conveys applicants' teaching approach. Within that narrative, there'll be the philosophy, but also, and this is just my opinion, and people look for different things in different applications. I always like to know something about what motivates the applicant. So that might be an experience of learning that they've had in the past. It could be the upbringing, their views on the role of education in society, etc., etc. Then what I did was, and it just was nice because it was mathematics, I had an equation that summarised my teaching, and then I was able to anchor everything back to that equation, and each part of the equation was one of the 4 criteria. So that gave my application a nice sort of story arc. So look for something like that. The basic structure sort of flowing through for me was, what did I do? Why did I do it? What was innovative about it? What evidence is there that the approach worked? And then what were the outcomes for the students? Sort of each thing I was talking about went through that sort of 5-step process. I tried to avoid stacking a lot of sort of evidence just at the end of a paragraph, have it embedded more. And if you're using set and sec, which you will need to, they're precise enough to be able to pull out some quite precise information and put it against a different claim. So rather than just saying student satisfaction, for instance, you might have a criteria, and I know the universities are all different, but there'll be something there about the assessment was fair and reasonable or something, and you'll get some feedback there. So when you're talking about evaluation, match it there. And then the 5th thing, if you have a overarching teaching theory, I use transactional distance theory. So everything I was talking about tied back to that sort of theoretical lens.
Excellent. I have to ask you, what was your equation that summarised your teaching? If each and every action there's an opposite reaction, is that the one?
That is one, probably more a physics one. But it wasn't like E equals MC squared or anything like that. It was just expressed. It was expressed in an equation form. That's all. So it was just relationships and pedagogy and evaluation, scholarship equals learning with a little bit of elaboration around it. It's well worth the read. And
I think I have read it. It's just that my memory is not good after reading so much. Things sort of just start to spill out. I'll have to go back.
I'll get it back off my parents.
I'm waiting for the application. I'm waiting for the application, which has the Hitchhiker's Guide through the Galaxy, which had that magic number that was the answer to
42s.
No 42. All right. Barbara, Mark and Blake, have you got any additional tips or similar tips?
Yeah. I think sort of following up on Jack's point about generating evidence, I think some of that, often you can sort of sit there thinking, well, what evidence is there? And you get a bit sort of flustered because you think, I don't have much evidence. You actually need to actively go and create it. So for us, that meant using test scores and, evidence of learning throughout the course. And we used myth-based quizzes, which are not directly part of the assessment, but we can sort of check the accuracy of people's knowledge before and after the course. We also sort of went out to the research literature, not just the research literature on learning, but also on group behaviour and things like that, and human behaviour, to see if what we were doing was having a positive impact on the student experience. And so, you can read broadly and use the literature to sort of back up your claims and show that what you're doing is good practice. The other thing, whenever I sort of get invited to give a talk or something, as we're collecting all the evidence, I'd actually ask the people who invited me to write a response after my talk that I could use for evidence. I'd say, look, I'm putting together some evidence. Can you tell me about what the impact this is for you and what the implications of what we've spoken about are? And they would write me a paragraph in an email, and I could use that as evidence. And so you go around it and you have to actually actively document what you're doing and do that purposefully over a number of years. I think the other thing too with the supplemental materials, which Jack mentioned, is it's a real opportunity. Don't do them last. I'd almost think about them, I do them at the same time, because I think, you can miss the opportunity to let people experience what your course is like. You need to use those supplemental materials to create that kind of emotional impact and do something visual. So that, the narrative was a big part of our course, and we've got lots of visual materials from the crime drama that we made. And so we try to get as much of that in there as possible so that people could kind of get a bit of a sense of what it was like to be a student in our course, so that it would give context for everything. And we used labels throughout the supplemental materials for each of the panels to link back to the claims we're making in the document. That's really, I guess, something we've talked about before is, people are nodding your head. They don't know, they kind of get that you're a good teacher, that's why you're applying, but they don't really know why or what it would be like. And, so you really have to step them through what it's like to be in your course.
Well, I guess sort of touching upon the stuff that's been said earlier, so we've talked about that we got a lot of feedback on previous drafts. So I think, so one thing is just to try and seek as feedback from as many different sources as you can But then crucially, certainly in our case, that you take each bit of feedback and then you evaluate it and decide whether it's something that's going to be useful for you, and just bear in mind that not all feedback is good feedback, certainly in our case. And then I guess another thing which has been mentioned a few times is just being very, very aware of what the criteria are for the award, and having that right up in front of you, and making sure that you haven't missed any opportunities for addressing the wording and the detail of those criteria.
Just add that I think in gathering evidence as well, sort of don't hold back on trying to gather that evidence. So have many different sources of evidence, because I think when you're putting the application together, if you can show from 3 or 4 different sources of evidence that they're saying the same thing and that happens to meet the criteria, then that can be immensely useful and very persuasive, rather than if you're just relying on one piece of evidence. So it's all about being very systematic. And it sounds, you're talking about sort of, I think the comment was made that the applications can be quite difficult to write because you have to be quite self-promotional in those applications. So because no one's, it's not a time to hold back. I think the same thing when you're thinking about gathering evidence, it's not a time to hold back. Gather absolutely everything you possibly can, because then you have a lot to help you build your case.
I mean, Jack made a good point before about his research. I think we were fortunate that we were able to use some of the materials we'd developed for the course in our training with the Queensland Police. And actually, that's one of the benefits of the award. We've since got a big contract, partly due to the award, I think. But, that was really good evidence of impact, because we're able to take what we've done in the classroom, adapt it for a different audience, and show a positive impact on police, thinking and practice. So, all of these things, you might think, well, that's not my teaching, it's my research, and my, engagement activity. But it is, it's all evidence of the quality of what you're doing in the classroom.
Great list of tips, but, obviously commonalities coming across, that clear story, telling that story and have that of evidence, and you create your own evidence. You might have to, create your own assessments and gather that evidence as well. But I really liked, Jack, where you had before and after quotes, so showing that progression that you've made and linking it all back to the literature. So have some sort of the teaching theory that you've used, or linking it back to your scholarly work. Think outside the box when you're thinking of your evidence. So really great suggestions. I really like that, and I hope the audience that watches this video or that are here live get a lot out of what you've said. And it ties beautifully and follows on beautifully with the tips that Shelley covered last week. So thank you for that. My next question is if you can share some of your challenges in writing the application, and how did you overcome these? Because, it's not an easy thing to do. How come you just didn't go, oh, this is too hard, I don't have time, I'm not going to be recognised? How come you just didn't put it aside and just, so what are some of the challenges and how did you overcome these? Jack, we'll start with you.
So I'll speak to 2 challenges. So the first challenge is that narrative structure. My penultimate draft, so the one before I submitted the final version, actually didn't have anywhere near enough narrative. So it was not until the very, very last version that I took the time to really reflect on why I became a teacher. And I think that's the question you should answer, because that ties into your motivations, ties into the literature that you use to inform your teaching. And yet, even in the second last draft I had, I don't think it was in there strongly enough. And how I overcame that was really through the feedback of the committees and assessment panels on mine at UQ. So that was how I overcame it, not because I'm so wonderful, but because the corporate knowledge was there and institutional knowledge that's very important. The second challenge I had is just draft fatigue. I must have written 50 versions. And at a certain point, doing it on a screen is kind of the last thing that I wanted to do. And you could just, it's all just so flexible and it's going to change. What does this mean? So I went and did 2 things. So whenever I looked at my draft, I had it on the biggest screen possible so I could see as many pages as possible so that I wasn't locked into any one section. I would be amending sections with oversight of other sections at the same time. And that didn't work that well. So I just printed all the pages out and actually wrote all of it by hand. And that's a writing tip in general that works for me. If push comes to shove, I write it by hand. You're much less likely to delete something you've written if you've actually put ink to paper, is my experience. Whereas you could be frozen on the keyboard, right? So 2 challenges and 2 tips.
Beautiful. Kevin, how about you?
Similar to Jack, you have to stay with it a long while, particularly if in my case, I wasn't successful. So you're with it really for for 2 years, sort of going back to it. So I guess don't throw out any old drafts, because sometimes you'll do a new improved draft and it will be disliked by the people who are reading it. So you go back to one of your sort of previous drafts. So that's a challenge. The other challenge is, it was mentioned earlier on, I think it was Barb mentioned it, finding the absolute limit of your self-worth, I guess, is a challenge. So you have to push your comfort, and I think I mentioned it before, sort of push your comfort sort of level. That would be my two challenges.
Mark, Barbara, Blake, what were your challenges?
So I can think of, in terms of dealing with negative feedback, one bit of advice I give to my students. I thought you were going
to say dealing with me.
I know. Well, we'll talk about that later. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Is that when you've got something like this, it can be very challenging to deal with sort of negative feedback and criticism and that sort of thing. But as I said, students, to grow a seed, you first have to shovel crap all over it.
I like that analogy.
What are you saying about my writing, Mark?
I think there is the real issue of draft fatigue. Yeah. There comes a point where it becomes almost the last thing that you ever want to have to look at again. And, particularly when the feedback keeps coming that it's not quite there, and you're like, well, what else can I give? But then, I guess, one tip is to allow yourself to have the time to recover from that kind of feedback. So if that's going to take you a couple of days, don't be having things right at the deadline, because sometimes you're going to need to get a bit of distance on it and a bit of perspective and know, I guess, fundamentally to persist. I've had previous applications for national awards where I was unsuccessful in getting a citation years ago. I made the decision not to go again because I just didn't have it within me and I didn't have anything more I could give. So I think what you have to do is take a bit of time and a bit of perspective to go, no, actually, is this the one that I am going to persist with? So allowing yourself time, I think, to fully engage with the process, understanding that it's going to be quite a roller coaster.
Yeah. I think, yes. Well, probably the initial biggest challenge was the change in writing style. Like, why can't you just put, like you do with a paper, put the evidence out there and let people reach their, own conclusions? It's not like that at all. There was the deep, dark days of multiple drafts and dealing with feedback and trying to figure out what should you put in and the difficult decisions about what to not put in so you've got space to include enough narrative. You can't just jam it full of evidence. There's got to be a story in there and you've got to actually, help the reader understand why you meet the criteria. And I think the thing that sort of got us through that is it wasn't as hard as making a feature-length drama from scratch. And so making the drama was... there were some very long days and dark days as things nearly didn't work. And I just sort of would think back to that and think, no, we can do this. This is all right in comparison to that. So let's get going. So that was kind of just putting it in perspective really helped deal with the challenges.
Yeah.
It's an opportunity. Yeah.
That's it. I think one final thought I had was maybe building on something Barbara said earlier, where exactly we put together things like this and you do have to self-promote yourself in a way that frankly doesn't feel natural. And I think I got a great bit of advice from a colleague where you're putting together this sort of thing. If you don't come away feeling slightly uncomfortable and feeling a little bit dirty, then you haven't done your job.
Great sharing of your challenges. So thank you so much for that. We've only got 10 minutes left. The next piece is really directed to Kevin and the psychology team. And then I will have a quick question for you, Jack, but just a quick response. I want you to turn your heads now, not to being an applicant, but to being assessors. You've all been assessors for a while, and Kevin, you were an assessor for the 2019 and the 2020 Teaching Awards Committee. I wanted to ask you, what do you look for in an application? So we'll start with you, Kevin.
I guess, again, it ties in with what we've been talking about all the way through. So as a long-time educator, for me, I want to see the scholarly approach very clearly.
Yeah.
So it's quite easy to do things just because you think they're good. So to have that evidence, both in terms of the outcomes, but also in terms of what's gone before in the literature. So certainly scholarly, creativity and innovation, and that often includes technology, but doesn't have to. But for me, that's not an end in itself. That's a means for helping the student. So sometimes technology will be useful. Sometimes it might get in the way of doing that. So making sure that you're your creative and innovative ideas, the means for the end, not the end themselves. As I said, I and this is just me, different panel members have different views. I want to get a sense of the person behind the application. And then the final thing, I guess the touchstone for me is any time I'm reading applications, well, how was all this helping the learning of the student sitting in the third row or the student studying online? If it's not helping them, then it's not, you're in the wrong award. Go for a research award or a service award or something or other. I always want to see, okay, well, how your conference presentation in Copenhagen, which is a beautiful city, helping Blake in the third row. Yeah. And if I'm not seeing how it's helping him, well, then what's it doing in this application?
Great. Barbara and Matt and Blake, what do you look for in an application?
I think what we were looking for is a real sense of what it was like to be in the class and how the evidence shows that, and I think Kevin's right, like how does it show the benefits for learning, in the class, and how does that map onto the criteria? Like you see a lot of applications where there's some really good things going on, but it's a little bit hard to see how that works and what it's like. And I think if you can really give people concrete examples, remember, readers are not going to necessarily be in your discipline. They're not going to understand, practices and language that's in your discipline. So you need to show them and explain in clear, simple terms, why it meets the criteria.
Yeah, so just to reiterate that point, absolutely jargon free. So give your application to people who know nothing about what you do and see if they can actually understand what you've done and what you're achieving, and just make sure your evidence absolutely speaks to the criteria. So how are you showing, for example, that students are actually learning, and just make sure that it's that narrative is so important. So with all the things that's been spoken about, but that sense of being almost in that person's classroom or part of the experience is absolutely key as a reader. I read many applications last year and I found myself thinking about a lot of them afterwards, just because of the strength of the narrative that was told. They were outstanding applications. They really were.
All right. And Jack, we look forward to having you on board as an assessor for this year. So I'm not asking you a question. A couple of encouraging words you'd like to send to potential applicants. One or two encouraging words. We'll just go around the room. Jack, what are one or two encouraging words?
Don't think we want to put anyone off telling the tales of how hard it was and how many years it was. I think even on the years that I was unsuccessful, it was very informative for my development as an academic. And I think that only because we were unsuccessful in multiple rounds have we been able to get to this point. So I think engaging with the process, whether you're successful or not, hopefully you are, but even if you're not, it's been very valuable for me.
Fantastic. Kevin, some engaging words.
Yeah, well, as an educator, thanks firstly for the quality of the teaching that you're doing at your institution. That's why we're all here. Apply for the awards. It's the only way that there's national recognition for teaching and learning. So we need these awards, and that's a plug for them going forwards. If there's any VCs or DVCs listening, fall in love with your keyboard.
Great. And the psychology.
Yeah, well, I would just say go for it this year, especially with the uncertainty about what's going to happen. I think if you're at all thinking about it, give it a go. Like Jack said, don't be dissuaded by the challenge. I think challenge is good. It makes you think about what you're doing, and it actually really improves what you're doing and helps you make more informed choices, with your teacher going in the future, whether you're successful or not, because you've actually had to, think really carefully about what you're doing. So give it a go. It's a really good experience and opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. The only way you can guarantee not to have a chance of becoming University Lecturer of the Year is to not to put in an application at all.
Just absolutely give it a shot. It will improve your, even if you draft it, you don't submit it, you draft it, you submit it, you're not successful, it will improve your practice. You'll know why you're doing what you're doing.
Great encouraging words. Love to hear from all of you. Question to the panel from Poppy. One of the key tips that came across today is to make the reader feel as if they are in class. Given the new category on assessment, I'm wondering how that tip can shift given assessments are not necessarily in class and can be online asynchronously and so forth.
With the assessment question, it's changed a bit from when we did it, but a lot of our assessment actually is in class because it forms an integral part of, how we have students experience the course. They're actually working on problems, and the problem's the assessment. So, I think if you're using online assessment, hopefully it's, for a similar purpose. And just the form format probably is less important rather than the reason and the linking between the assessment and what else you're doing in the course. So I think really just put it in the bigger context.
Say something quickly. With online assessment, you have the added benefit that there's probably analytics built into that platform. So that's an even richer source of data you can get.
Yeah, great. Kevin, anything else you want to add? No, all good. All right. And I'm sorry, I've taken up pretty much the whole hour, but it was just so great talking to you. And I could talk to you for another hour and probably another day, actually. Really, it was really great. I just wanted to say thank you. You've been a delight to have in this hour and to share all your experiences, your thoughts in terms of the tips and advice that you're giving potential applicants. And I really do hope these awards continue on. I think there's, it sends really important signals that the Australian government does support teaching, but I don't think that's going to change. But hopefully there's other ways that we can support our university educators. Thank you so much, everyone. Great tips, advice from our 3 teams of national award winners. If you wouldn't mind giving them a virtual or physical clap, whichever way. I think we've got a lot out of it. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great afternoon. I look forward to getting some great submissions this year. Bye, everybody.